Lena had been driving for 3 hours when the storm hit. It came fast, the way storms always did over the ashstone ridges. No warning, no build-up, just a wall of dark clouds that rolled in from the east and swallowed the sky whole. The wind picked up first, throwing dust and loose rock against the side of her transport vehicle. Then the rain came. Hard, cold, and angry. She gripped the controls and tried to push through it. She had done this route 100 times. Medical supplies from the human outpost at Veldara to the small field station at the edge of the ridges. 2 hours out, 2 hours back, home before dark. Simple. But the ashstone ridges had never cared much for simple. The transport made a sound she did not like, a low grinding noise from somewhere under the engine, and then the whole vehicle shuddered and slowed. She pressed the accelerator. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. The engine coughed once like an old man waking up and then went completely quiet. The transport rolled to a stop on the side of the ridge path. Lena sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer the roof. She looked at the control panel. Half the lights were red. She picked up her radio and called the outpost. "Greg," she said. "My transport just died." Pause. Then Greg's voice came through, crackly and unimpressed. "Where are you?" "Sector 4. Near the ashstone upper path." Another pause, longer this time. "Lena, that's Dragon Country." "I know where I am, Greg. You need to sit tight. I can get someone out to you, but not until the storm passes. Could be 4 hours. Maybe more." She looked out the window. The rain was getting heavier. The temperature on her dashboard read 9 degrees and dropping. Sitting in a broken transport on an open ridge path in a storm for 4 hours was not a good plan. The vehicle had no heating now that the engine was dead. She would be fine for a while, but not 4 hours. Not in 9 degrees. She grabbed her medic pack from the back seat. It was always with her, a habit from years of field work. She pulled her weatherproof jacket tight, pushed open the transport door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp. She bent her head down and moved. There was a section of rock face about 200 meters up the path. She had passed it dozens of times. She remembered seeing a dark opening in the rock wall there. A cave or something close to it, big enough to wait out a storm. She found it in less than 5 minutes, which was good, because by then her jacket was soaked through and her hands were already stiff from the cold. The cave entrance was low. She had to duck slightly to get inside, but it opened up quickly. The rock ceiling rose above her head and the sound of the storm dropped from a roar to a dull hum the moment she stepped in. She exhaled. Dry ground. Dark but dry. She pulled out her small torch from the medic pack and clicked it on. The beam moved across the cave walls. Rough stone, dark gray, dry. The floor was flat and covered in fine ash-colored dust. The cave went back maybe 30 meters, widening in the middle before narrowing again at the far end. She took a few steps inside, letting her body temperature start to recover. Then she stopped. At the far end of the cave, half hidden in the shadow, something was lying on the ground. She did not move for a moment. She just looked. Her torch beam was not strong enough to reach it clearly, so she took a slow step forward. Then another. Then another. It was a dragon. A young one, that was clear immediately. It was not large. About the size of a big horse, maybe a little smaller. It was lying on its side with its legs folded underneath it and its neck stretched out along the cave floor. Its wings were spread slightly but wrong, one of them bent at an angle that made her stomach drop a little. The scales that covered its body were a dull, flat gray. Not the rich dark gray she had seen in images of healthy dragons. This gray was the color of ash left over after a fire has gone completely cold. She stood very still and watched its side. It was rising and falling. Slowly. But it was rising and falling. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. It was alive. Her first thought, the trained, professional, experienced part of her brain, ran through the facts quickly. Young dragon. Alone. Injured wing. Dull scales that suggested poor health or illness. Breathing but not moving. Probably had been lying there for some time. She could see a dark stain along the edge of the bent wing where the membrane had torn. Her second thought was the one that most people would have had first. She was standing in a cave with a dragon. She waited. The dragon did not move. It did not react to the torchlight. Either it was unconscious or it was too weak to lift its head. She took another slow step forward. Still nothing. She crouched down about 3 meters away from it and kept her torch beam low, not wanting to shine it directly into its face. She could see it more clearly now. The torn wing membrane was worse than it had looked from a distance. The edges of the tear were dark and the skin around it was swollen. That meant infection. The scales along its neck inside were not just dull. Some of them had small cracks running through them, which she knew from basic field training was a sign that the animal had been without proper nutrition or water for too long. The dragon was not just hurt. It was failing. She sat back on her heels and thought for a moment. Every practical rule she had ever been taught said the same thing. You do not approach an injured wild creature alone. You do not put yourself between a dangerous animal and its pain. You especially do not touch a dragon without a team, without equipment, without backup. She thought about those rules. Then she thought about the torn wing, the cracked scales, the slow, shallow breathing. She thought about how long it had probably been lying here, alone, in the dark. She set her torch down carefully on the cave floor, angled so the light spread across the space without hitting the dragon's eyes directly. Then she opened her medic pack and laid it flat in front of her, looking at what she had. It was a standard field kit. Bandage rolls, antiseptic solution, 2 types of wound patches, a small folding tool set, pain relief injectors calibrated for human use, a thermal blanket, water purification tablets, and her emergency ration bars. Not much. Definitely not designed for a dragon. But she had kept people alive with less. She began going through the pack slowly and carefully, thinking through each item and what it might be used for. The antiseptic solution was strong. It worked on most known biological tissues, not just human. The bandage material was stretchy and adhesive. The wound patches sealed tears and held under pressure. She looked at the torn wing membrane again. Treatable. Not easy, not comfortable, and definitely not something the dragon was going to enjoy. But treatable. She looked at the cracked scales and the signs of dehydration. There was a sound at the back of the cave, faint but steady. She moved her torch beam slowly until she found it. A thin line of water running down the back wall and collecting in a shallow pool in the rock. Natural. Clean enough, probably. She could work with that. She repacked her kit carefully, keeping the antiseptic and bandage rolls at the top. Then she moved forward another meter, slowly, and crouched down again. This close she could hear the dragon breathing. Each breath was a quiet, strained sound, like something working too hard to do something that should have been easy. She reached out and placed her hand gently on the stone floor, just at the edge of the dragon's line of sight. Not touching it. Just there. Present. Okay, she said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. Just out loud because saying it out loud made it real and made it hers. Let's see what we are working with. The dragon's eye opened. Just one. The one facing her. It was a deep, dark amber color, clouded slightly with exhaustion but open. Looking at her. Not with anger. Not with fear. With something quieter than both of those things. Lena looked back. Outside the storm continued. The rain hit the rock and the wind moved through the ridge and the whole world was cold and loud and indifferent. Inside the cave, a young woman and a small dying dragon looked at each other in the torchlight. And Lena did not move. The first night was the hardest. Lena did not sleep. She sat close to Ash, she had started calling him that in her head because of the ash-gray color of his scales, and watched his breathing. It was still shallow. Still slow. But it was there and she held on to that the way a person holds onto a rope in deep water. She had radioed Greg before the storm cut the signal. I am staying, she had told him. A long silence. Then, Lena, it is a dragon. He is injured, Greg. Wing infection. Dehydration. He will not survive on his own. You are a human medic. Not a dragon medic. A living thing is a living thing, she said. Send me supplies when the storm clears. I will radio again tomorrow. Greg had said several things after that. She had not listened to most of them. She spent the first night cleaning the torn wing membrane as carefully as she could. It was slow work. The tear was long, running from the middle joint of the wing down to the lower edge, and the skin around it was hot and tight with infection. She used half her antiseptic solution just on the first clean. She worked with small movements, steady hands, and a lot of patience. Ash flinched once, hard, when she pressed against the worst part of the swelling. His whole body tensed and a low sound came from deep in his chest. Not a growl exactly, more like a warning from something that was too tired to do anything about it. She stopped. Waited. Kept her hand still on the wing. I know, she said quietly. I know it hurts. I'm almost done. He did not move again. She finished the clean and pressed 2 of her wound patches along the edges of the tear, sealing the worst of it shut. It was not a perfect fix. But it would hold for now and keep the infection from spreading further. By the time she was done her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, just from concentration held too long. She ate one of her ration bars, drank some water and sat back against the cave wall. Ash's breathing had steadied a little. Not much, but a little. She took that as a good sign and closed her eyes. She did not mean to sleep, but she did for about 2 hours, sitting upright against the stone wall with her medic pack in her lap. When she woke up, Ash was looking at her. Both eyes this time. The storm passed by the second morning. Greg sent a supply drop to the ridge path near her broken transport, basic food, water, extra bandage material, and a portable shelter unit that she carried back to the cave in 3 trips. He also sent a message written on paper tucked inside the supply box, which read, "You are completely out of your mind." She folded it up and put it in her jacket pocket. She set up the shelter unit near the cave entrance, a small folding structure that kept the wind out and held a little heat. She slept there at night. During the day she was with Ash. The routine built itself slowly. Morning she checked the wing membrane. Changed the patches when they needed changing. Cleaned around the tear with a solution she made by boiling cave minerals in her water container. She had found a deposit of pale stone along the back wall that, when dissolved in hot water, produced something close enough to a mild antiseptic rinse. It was not medical grade, but it worked. Afternoon, she brought water from the pool at the back of the cave and encouraged Ash to drink. The first 3 days he would not. He just looked at the container she held near his head and breathed slowly. On the 4th day he drank. Not much. But he drank. Evening she sat near him and talked. Not because she thought he understood every word. Just because silence in a cave is heavy, and her voice seemed to do something to the atmosphere between them. It made it lighter somehow. She talked about the outpost, about Greg's terrible cooking, about the supply routes she had driven so many times she could do them with her eyes closed. Ash would lie there with his eyes half open, watching her, and she never really knew how much he was taking in. But he was always calm when she talked. So she kept talking. By night 7 he stopped flinching when she touched the wing. By night 10 the swelling around the tear had gone down noticeably. The skin was still tender but the heat had left it. The infection was retreating. She radioed Greg with the update. "The wing infection is responding," she told him. "How are his scales?" Greg asked. He had started asking medical questions, which she took to mean he had quietly accepted the situation. Still cracked, but less gray. Some color coming back near his neck. What color? She looked at Ash across the cave. Something between brown and gold. Hard to say in this light. Pause. "Amber," Greg said. "Maybe," she said. "Yeah, maybe amber." By night 15 something changed. She came to check the wing in the morning and Ash lifted it himself. Just slightly, just enough, to give her better access to the underside of the membrane. It was a small thing. But it stopped her completely for a moment. He had never done that before. She looked at him. He looked back at her with those dark amber eyes. "Thank you," she said. He blinked once, slowly, and held the wing in position while she worked. After that he always did it. Every morning the wing would lift when she approached. It became their signal. Their small agreement. She had not taught it to him. He had simply decided on his own that this was how it would go between them now. She told Greg about it that evening. Another pause on the radio. Then, "Lena, I think your dragon likes you." "He is not my dragon, Greg." "Right?" Greg said in the voice he used when he was not going to argue but also did not agree. Night 22 came without warning. She woke at about 2 in the morning to a sound she had not heard before. A low, continuous rumble from inside the cave, almost like a vibration in the stone itself. She grabbed her torch and went inside and found Ash on his side, shaking. She pressed her hand to his neck. He was burning. Not warm. Burning. The kind of heat that comes from deep inside, from a body fighting something it is losing to. She did not panic. Panic was not useful. She moved fast instead. She checked his flame glands, the soft area under his jaw, and they were swollen and dark. The infection had moved. It had traveled from the wing up through the connected tissue and settled somewhere it should not be. She did not have the medicine to fight this properly. She had 2 antibacterial patches left and a lot of determination. She used both patches on the gland area, pressing them firmly and keeping pressure steady. Then she started carrying water. The pool at the back of the cave was about 300 meters from where Ash lay. Her helmet was the largest container she had. She filled it, carried it, poured it carefully over his neck and sides to keep the surface temperature down. Then she went back and filled it again. She did this all night. The next day. The next night. And the one after that. 4 nights without real sleep. She counted them by the number of times she made the walk to the pool and back. She lost count somewhere after 50. Her legs ached. Her back ached. At some point on the 3rd sleepless night she sat down next to Ash for just a moment to rest and found herself leaning against his side, her eyes closing against her will. His warmth, still too high but lower than before, was solid and steady under her shoulder. She pushed herself back up and went to fill the helmet again. On the morning of the fourth day the fever broke. She knew it the moment she touched him. The heat was gone. His breathing had deepened and slowed into something that sounded like real sleep rather than struggle. The swelling under his jaw had reduced overnight. She sat down on the cave floor and did not move for a long time. Night 29 came quietly. There was no storm. No drama. Just a cool evening with a clear sky visible from the cave entrance and a stillness that had settled over the ashstone ridges like something that had been waiting. Lena was sitting near the cave mouth when she heard movement behind her. She turned. Ash was standing. All four legs on the ground, head up, eyes clear. He stood there in the middle of the cave looking at his own legs like he was checking that they were real. Then, slowly, with the careful effort of something doing a thing for the very first time, he spread both wings. They were not perfect. The healed tear was still visible. The left wing sat slightly lower than the right. But they were wide and they were real and they were his. He held them open and looked at her. Lena looked back. Outside, somewhere above the ridges, the first stars of the evening were beginning to appear. She did not say anything. She just smiled. The quiet kind, the kind that comes up on its own before a person has time to decide whether to show it or not. 29 nights. And Ash was standing. The morning of day 30 started like any other. Lena woke up in her small shelter unit near the cave entrance, rolled her shoulders against the stiffness that had settled into her back from weeks of sleeping on folded equipment, and made herself a cup of hot water with the last of her instant coffee powder. She stood at the cave mouth with the cup in both hands and looked out at the ashstone ridges in the early light. The sky was pale gold and quiet. The kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath. She turned to check on Ash. He was standing near the back of the cave, which still surprised her every time she saw it. After 29 nights of watching him lie on that cave floor, seeing him upright felt like something slightly impossible that had decided to happen anyway. His wings were folded against his sides. His scales had continued to change over the past weeks. The flat gray was almost completely gone now, replaced by something warmer, a deep color that caught the morning light coming through the cave entrance and held it. Ember. Greg had been right. She walked in and ran her hand along the edge of his healed wing, her morning check, the same one she had done every day for a month. The membrane was firm and smooth. The scar from the tear was pale and flat. She pressed gently along the jaw line where the fever had hit hardest. No swelling. No heat. Looking good, she told him. Ash turned his head slightly and watched her with one eye. She was putting her check tools back into the medic pack when the shadow fell across the cave entrance. She noticed it because the morning light through the opening changed, dimmed suddenly like something large had passed in front of it. She looked up. And then looked up further. The dragon standing at the entrance of the cave was not young. That was the first thing that was obvious. He was enormous, 4 times the size of Ash, maybe more, and his scales were the deep, layered gray of very old stone. Not the sick gray that Ash had arrived with. The gray of something that had existed for a very long time and intended to keep existing. His wings were folded tight against his body. His eyes were pale, almost white, and they moved from Lena to Ash and back to Lena with slow, careful attention. Lena stood very still. Every sensible part of her brain was pointing out, clearly and calmly, that she was standing between a very large old dragon and the cave exit. She noted this information and chose to remain exactly where she was. The old dragon looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, not loud, but the kind of deep that you felt in your chest rather than just heard with your ears. The words were in the common trade language that most species in the Outer Rim used for communication. Slow and deliberate, like someone who had spoken many languages over many years and had learned to choose words with care. "You are the human," he said. It was not a question. "Lena," she said. "Yes." His pale eyes moved to Ash again. Ash had gone very still the moment the old dragon appeared. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of something that recognizes authority and does not know what to do with it. "My name is Vorn," the old dragon said. "I am elder of the clan that this one belonged to." Lena noticed the word. Belonged. Past tense. "He still belongs," she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out before she decided to let it. Vorn looked at her again. There was no anger in it. No threat. Just that slow, weighing attention. The look of something that was genuinely trying to understand what it was seeing. "May I enter?" he asked. She stepped to the side. "Please." He moved into the cave with surprising quietness for something his size. He stopped a few meters from Ash and looked at him the way you look at something you expected to be gone. His expression, as much as she could read it, was not cold. It was something more complicated than cold. Something that sat between relief and confusion, and something else she did not have a word for yet. Ash lowered his head. Not all the way to the ground, but down. A small bow. Vorn was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to Lena. "You have been here 30 days, he said. 29 nights, she said. 30 days today. Alone." "Yes." He looked at the medic pack on the ground. The empty antiseptic bottles lined up near the cave wall. The worn bandage rolls. The portable shelter unit. The marks on the stone floor where she had sat night after night. He looked at all of it the way a person reads a page, taking it in, processing it, understanding what it meant. "We left him here," Vorn said. He said it plainly, with no attempt to soften it. 29 nights ago. The clan moved on and we left him here. Lena did not say anything. "I want you to understand that this was not cruelty," Vorn continued. "In our way it is not cruelty. When one of our young cannot rise, cannot fly, cannot keep pace, we do not have a tradition of staying. We move. The strong continue. The weak," he paused. "The weak are considered already gone. We have a word for it. Ethmar." He said the word carefully, like it mattered that she heard it correctly. "Already gone," she repeated. "Yes. It is not a punishment. It is simply what is. A dragon who cannot fly is not a dragon who will survive. And a clan that stays for those who cannot survive, does not survive either. This is what we have always known." The cave was very quiet. Outside, the morning wind moved through the ridges with a low, steady sound. Lena looked at Ash. He was still standing with his head slightly lowered, his eyes on the cave floor. She thought about night 22. The fever. The walk to the pool and back, over and over, with her helmet full of water. She thought about the morning he first lifted his wing to help her reach the underside of the membrane. She thought about the way he had looked at her on night 29 with his wings spread, not perfect, not fully healed, but open and real in his. She looked back at Vorn. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "You said you left him 29 nights ago. But you are here now. On day 30. You came back." Something moved in Vorn's pale eyes. "We received reports," he said carefully. "A Varith patrol. They radioed that a human was living in a cave in the ridges. With a young dragon." He paused. "I did not believe it. So I came to see. And?" Lena said. "And here you are," he said simply. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked the question she had been expecting since he arrived, the one that had been sitting in the air between them since he walked through the cave entrance. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "He is not your clan. Not your species. You had no reason. No obligation. You owed him nothing." He tilted his great head slightly. "Why did you not leave him?" Lena thought about it. Not because she did not know the answer. She had known the answer since night 1, since the moment she sat down and opened her medic pack. She thought about it because she wanted to say it right. She wanted to give Vorn the real answer, not a quick one. "He was still breathing," she said. "When I found him. He was hurt and sick and alone, and it was clear that everyone had gone. But he was still breathing." She looked at Ash. "Where I come from, that is always enough. That is the whole reason. If something is still breathing, you do not walk away from it. You sit down and you figure out what you can do. That is just what you do." Vorn was silent. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say. The silence of someone who had received something unexpected and was turning it over slowly in their mind, looking at it from different sides. "Your kind does this," he said finally. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Lena said. "We build whole systems around it. Hospitals. Laws. People who spend their entire lives learning how to help other living things survive. We even do it for species that are not our own." She paused. "We have always done it. For as long as we have been around." Vorn looked at Ash again. Ash had lifted his head during her answer. He was looking at her now, not at Vorn, not at the cave floor. At her. With those dark amber eyes that she had learned to read over 29 nights. The old elder turned back to Lena one more time. His pale eyes were different now, still careful, still weighing, but something in them had shifted. Like a door had opened somewhere behind them. "Explain your kind to me," he said quietly. Lena sat down on the cave floor, cross-legged, with her coffee long gone cold, and she began to talk. She talked about hospitals and the people who worked through the night in them. She talked about strangers who ran toward fires instead of away. She talked about humans who crossed oceans to bring food to people they had never met. She talked about children who found injured birds on the ground and carried them home in cupped hands and stayed up all night beside them. She talked for a long time. Vorn sat and listened and did not interrupt once. And when she finally stopped, Ash, standing quietly behind her the whole time, opened his mouth and produced a small, unsteady flame. It flickered once in the cool cave air, pale gold and uncertain, like a candle learning to exist. It was the first flame he had ever made. Lena turned and looked at it. Then she smiled, the quiet kind again, the kind that arrived before she decided to show it. Outside, the morning was fully open now, bright and wide across the ashstone ridges. And inside the cave, an old dragon who had seen centuries of the world sat very still and thought about something he had never thought about before. It started 3 days after Vorn's visit. Lena had been watching Ash move around the cave for a week, walking, stretching his wings, building back the strength in his legs, and she had decided, quietly and without making a big announcement of it, that it was time. His wings were healed. His scales were bright. He was eating well, drinking well, sleeping deeply instead of the shallow, exhausted sleep of the sick. His body was ready. She could see very clearly that the rest of him was not so sure. She did not push. She waited until the morning when Ash walked to the cave entrance on his own and stood there looking out at the open sky above the ridges. He stood there for a long time. His wings shifted slightly at his sides. Not spreading, just moving, the way a person's hands move when they are thinking about doing something they are nervous about. Lena came and stood beside him. "You could try today," she said. "Quiet. No pressure in it. Just an observation, laid down gently like something he could pick up or leave alone." Ash looked out at the sky. Then he looked down at the ground below the ridge path. It was not a long drop, maybe 4 meters from the cave entrance to the flat rock below. Enough to get air under the wings. Enough to launch from. He looked at Lena. She nodded once. He stepped to the edge. His wings came open, wide, the full span of them, catching the morning wind. For just a moment he was magnificent. Completely and purely magnificent, standing at the edge of the rock with the sky behind him and the light hitting his amber scales and his wings held high and open. Then he jumped. The wings beat, once hard, and he was in the air. For about 4 seconds. Then the left wing dipped too low, the right overcorrected, and Ash came down fast and landed hard on the flat rock below with a sound that made Lena wince from the cave entrance. Not a crash exactly. More like a very heavy, very ungraceful arrival. She climbed down quickly. Ash was already standing by the time she reached him. Physically fine, no new injuries, nothing broken. She checked him over fast and thoroughly. His wings folded back against his sides. He was looking at the ground. Not at his wings. Not at the sky. At the ground. She had seen that look before. Not on a dragon, on people. On patients who had tried to do something their body was supposed to be able to do and found that the gap between supposed to and actually was wider than they expected. It was a particular kind of hurt that had nothing to do with the body. "You got air," she told him. 4 seconds. That is 4 seconds more than yesterday. He did not look up. She did not push further. She just sat down on the flat rock beside him and let the morning pass quietly around them. He tried again in the afternoon. Lena had not suggested it. He had walked back up to the cave entrance on his own, stood at the edge again and looked back at her once before he jumped. This time the wings held longer, maybe 7 or 8 seconds. He got higher, cleared the flat rock below, and made it almost to the first ridge line before the left wing dipped again. He landed in the loose rock at the base of the ridge, skidding slightly before stopping. She climbed down again. Checked him again. Still fine physically. But he was doing the thing with his eyes again, that downward look that had nothing to do with the ground he was staring at. This time she sat down in the rocks next to him and started doing the joint check she did every morning, running her hands along the wing bones, pressing lightly at the joints, checking the flexibility of the membrane. It gave her hands something to do and gave him something familiar while she talked. She did not plan what she said next. It just came out, the way honest things often do when a person stops thinking too carefully about them. "I was born too early," she said. Her hands kept moving along the wing joint, steady and calm. "Too small. The doctors told my parents I probably would not make it through the first week. My lungs were not ready. My heart was working too hard." She pressed gently at the lower joint and felt him hold still under her hands. Listening, she thought. "They kept me in a small unit with machines helping me breathe for 2 months. 2 months before I was strong enough to do it on my own." She moved to the next joint. The wind came through the ridges and moved around them both. "There were people who said it was not worth it," she continued. Quiet. Matter of fact. Not angry, just honest. That the resources were needed elsewhere. That the odds were too low. that it would have been better to move on. She paused. Nobody who loved me agreed with that. So they stayed. Every night. Taking turns so that someone was always there. She finished the joint check and sat back, resting her arms on her knees. And here I am, she said. Bothering dragons in a cave. Ash had turned his head during the last part. He was looking at her now, not at the ground. At her face. With that steady amber gaze that she had learned over 30 nights to read like a language. She met his eyes. Your wings work, she told him. I checked them every day for a month. The heel is good. The joints are strong. What happened up there? She nodded toward the ridge. That is not your wings failing. That is you not believing them yet. And that is a different problem. That one takes longer to fix than a torn membrane. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked up at the sky. That evening Vorn came again. He did not say much. He settled on the high ridge above the cave, a massive shape against the pale evening sky, and watched. He had brought 2 younger dragons with him. One of them was a young female with dark green-gray scales who stayed close to Vorn's side and watched the flat rock below with bright, curious eyes. Lena noticed them but did not comment. She simply went about her evening routine, checking on Ash, eating her ration bar, sitting near the cave entrance in the cooling air. She wondered what it cost Vorn to come back here. To sit on that ridge and watch the dragon his clan had left behind try to do the thing that every dragon was supposed to do naturally. She wondered if he felt the weight of it the way she thought he might. She decided he probably did. He had the look of something carrying something. The third day came in cold and bright. There was a strong wind from the east, the kind that moved fast and clean across the ridges, the kind that was actually good for flying if a person, or a dragon, knew how to use it. Ash stood at the cave entrance in the early morning and Lena stood beside him as she had on the first day. He was still for a long time. Longer than the first day. Longer than the second. She did not speak. She did not nod. She did not do anything except stand there beside him the way she had stood beside him for 30 nights. Present, steady, not going anywhere. His wings opened. She felt the air move when they spread, a small rush of wind that pushed against her jacket and stirred her hair. His scales caught the early light and held it. His legs were firm on the rock edge. His head was up. He looked at the sky. And he jumped. The wings came down hard, the first beat powerful and clean, and he rose. She watched him go up, her hand coming up automatically to shield her eyes from the morning light. He climbed. Not perfectly, he tilted left and corrected, tilted right and corrected again, but he did not fall. The left wing held. The right matched it. His tail moved behind him, adjusting his balance the way it was built to do. He kept climbing. Up past the flat rock. Up past the first ridge line. Up past the second. He was above the ashstone ridges now, a dark amber shape against the pale morning blue, and he was still going up. She stood at the cave entrance and watched until he leveled out, high above, catching the eastern wind and riding it, and the tilting smoothed and the corrections became smaller and then almost disappeared entirely. He was flying. Not falling forward. Not surviving the air. Flying. She did not cheer. She did not shout. Her throat felt too full for words and her eyes were doing something she decided not to examine too closely. She just stood there with her hands still shading her eyes and her face turned up to the morning sky, watching a small amber dragon ride the wind above the ridges like he had always known how. Behind her, from the high ridge, she heard a sound she had not heard before. Deep and resonant, like the stone itself vibrating. She turned and looked up. Vorn was watching Ash fly. And the sound coming from him, low and steady and ancient, was something she realized after a moment she recognized. It was the same sound a person makes when something they were afraid was lost turns out not to be lost after all. She turned back to the sky. Ash was still flying. Ash landed in the late afternoon. Lena heard him before she saw him, the sound of large wings pulling back against the air, the heavy but controlled thud of 4 legs meeting solid ground. She stepped out of the cave and found him standing on the flat rock below the entrance, his chest moving with deep steady breaths, his amber scales bright with the light of the low sun behind him. He had been flying for most of the day. She climbed down to him and did her check, hands along the wing joints, pressure at the membrane, a look at the healed scar from the old tear. Everything was firm. Everything was warm in the right way, the warmth of muscles that had worked hard and held up well, not the heat of strain or damage. Good, she told him. Really good. He stood still under her hands the way he always did during the morning check. Patient. Familiar. Used to her touch in the way that only comes from a long time of choosing to allow it. She finished the check and stepped back. And then Ash did something she had never seen him do before. He turned to face her directly, fully, squarely, the way dragons usually only face things they were about to make a decision about. His wings were folded tight against his sides. His head was up. He looked at her for a long moment with those dark amber eyes, and something in them was different from any look she had seen in 30 nights of watching his face. It was not the look of a sick creature accepting help. It was not the cautious look of something learning to trust. It was something much clearer than both of those. Certain and calm and deliberate. Then he lowered his head. Not slightly. Not the small bow she had seen him give Vorn on day 30. All the way down, his great neck bending until his chin touched the flat rock at her feet, his eyes level with her boots, his whole head resting on the ground in front of her. And he stayed there. Lena stared at him. She looked at the top of his head, the amber scales there, each one perfectly fitted against the next, catching the late afternoon light. She looked at the line of his neck, curved down and offered forward. She looked at his eyes, which were still open, looking up at her from the ground with that clear and certain expression. She had absolutely no idea what this meant. Her first thought was that something was wrong. That he was hurt somewhere she had missed. That the day of flying had done damage she had not found in the check. She crouched down quickly and ran her hands over his neck and jaw, pressing gently, looking for heat or swelling. Nothing. He was fine. He did not lift his head. He stayed exactly as he was. She straightened up and looked at him, genuinely puzzled. Then, because she did not know what else to do, she reached out and patted his snout. 2 pats. Gentle. The same way she had patted him on the early nights when he had been in pain and she had wanted to tell him without words that it was going to be okay. Are you all right? She asked him. A sound came from the ridge above. She looked up. Vorn was there. He had returned in the late afternoon as he had done every day since his first visit, settling on the high rock to watch the flying practice from above. The 2 younger dragons were with him as usual, including the dark green-gray female who had started coming closer each day, edging down the ridge inch by inch the way curious creatures do when they want a better look at something but do not want to admit it. The sound coming from Vorn was something she had never heard from him before. It was big and warm and it rolled down from the ridge and filled the space around them. He was laughing. Not a small sound. A real one, deep and genuine and completely uncontrolled, the laugh of something that had been surprised into it and had no interest in stopping. The 2 younger dragons looked at each other with wide eyes. The green-gray female actually took a small step backward, as if the sound itself had startled her. Lena looked back at Ash, then up at Vorn, then back at Ash. What did I do? She asked. Vorn's laugh settled slowly into something lower, still warm, still amused, but quieter. He began to make his way down from the ridge with the careful, deliberate movement of something very large navigating smaller terrain. He reached the flat rock and folded his wings and looked at Lena with those pale eyes that were still bright with what had just happened. You patted him, Vorn said. I did, Lena agreed. On the snout. Yes. Vorn looked at Ash, who had finally lifted his head from the ground and was now sitting back on his haunches with what Lena could only describe, even knowing it was probably not the right word, as a dignified expression. What he did just now, Vorn said turning back to her, is called Ethboru. It is the deepest form of acknowledgement one dragon can give to another. He paused. Or, apparently, to a human. It means, in the most direct translation, that his life belongs to the one before him. That the debt is complete and total and can never be fully returned. It is not given lightly. In the history of our clan, I have seen it given 3 times. Lena was quiet for a moment. And I patted him, she said. On the snout, Vorn confirmed. Another ripple of that deep warmth moved through his voice. Not quite another laugh. But close. Lena looked at Ash. He looked back at her. She thought about everything that lived inside that gesture. 30 nights, the fever, the water carried in her helmet, the joint checks every morning, the long talks in the dark cave when she had not even known if he understood her. She thought about the way he had lifted his wing to help her reach the underside of the membrane. The first small flame in the cave when she had finished talking to Vorn. The moment on the 3rd day of training when he had stopped looking at the ground and looked at the sky instead. She reached out and put her hand on the side of his face, not a pat this time. Just her hand resting there, warm against the scales that had gone from ash gray to amber over 29 nights. We're even, she told him quietly. Ash made a low sound in his chest. Not the warning rumble of pain. The other one, the sound she had first heard around night 15, the sound she thought of privately as his settled sound, the one that meant something in him had gone calm. Vorn watched this and was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened and turned to the 2 younger dragons on the ridge behind him. He spoke to them in the dragon tongue, Deep syllables that rolled and overlapped in ways the common trade language did not, and they came down from the ridge and settled on the flat rock. The green-gray female came closest, stopping about 2 meters from Lena and studying her with open, unguarded curiosity. Lena studied her back. "Her name is Dara," Vorn said. "She is the youngest of the clan. She has been watching you for 2 weeks." "I noticed," Lena said. Dara tilted her head at the sound of her name, and her eyes, bright gold, much lighter than ashes, moved between Lena and Vorn. Then, slowly, with the careful movement of a decision being made in real time, Dara lowered her head and moved it forward until it was within reach. Lena looked at Vorn. "You can," he said simply. She reached out and placed her hand on Dara's head. The scales there were smooth and cool, different in texture from ashes, lighter, finer. Dara went completely still under her hand, the way young creatures do when they receive something they were hoping for but were not sure they would get. Vorn watched all of it. Then he spoke. "I have been thinking," he said, "since the morning I came here and you told me why you stayed. I have been thinking about what to do with what you showed me." He looked at Ash. Then at Dara. Then at the other young dragon behind them. Then back at Lena. "In our clan record, the history that goes back further than I can personally remember, there is a status given to those who protect what belongs to the clan, who stand between the clan and loss, who give without being asked and without counting the cost." He paused. "It is called Ethvarath," he said. "Protector standing. It means that your name is written into the clan record, that you are recognized, formally in front of witnesses, as one who has given protection to what is ours." He looked at her steadily. "No human has ever held this standing," he said. "In any clan. In any record I know of." The flat rock was completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have paused. "I would like to give it to you now," Vorn said. "If you will receive it." Lena stood very still. She thought about saying something modest. About saying she had only done what anyone would do, that she did not need a title or a formal recognition, that 30 nights in a cave was just 30 nights in a cave. She thought about all of that. Then she thought about what it actually meant, not for her but for what it said. That something ancient and proud and completely its own had looked at a human woman with a medic pack and a helmet full of water and decided that what she had done was worth writing down. She straightened her shoulders. "I will receive it," she said. Vorn lowered his great head toward her, not all the way to the ground but down. A formal gesture. Deliberate and considered. He spoke words in the dragon tongue, slow and clear, loud enough that the 2 younger dragons behind him heard every syllable. The words moved through the air of the ashstone ridges and settled there. When he finished he raised his head and looked at her. "It is done," he said. "Your name is in the record, Lena. The first human in the history of this clan." He paused. "Possibly the first in any clan." Ash made his settled sound again. Dara, still standing close, pressed her head very slightly against Lena's hand. Lena stood on the flat rock below the cave where she had spent 30 nights and looked at the old elder dragon and the young amber dragon and the curious green-gray dragon and the wide open sky above the ashstone ridges. She did not have a word for what she felt. She thought that was probably all right. Some things were bigger than the words available for them. 6 months is not a long time. In the grand scale of the galaxy, in the long slow turning of planets and the ancient records of species that had existed for thousands of years, 6 months was barely a breath. A footnote. A small pause between one thing and the next. But 6 months can change things. Lena knew this because she had watched it happen in a cave in the ashstone ridges, one night at a time. She had watched a gray, cracked, barely breathing creature become something bright and strong and real. She knew better than most people that 6 months, 30 nights even, was enough time for the world to become completely different from what it had been before. She was back at the outpost now. Had been for almost 5 months. Life had returned to something that looked like normal from the outside. She drove supply routes. She stocked the medical bay. She ate Greg's terrible cooking and did not complain about it, mostly. She slept in a real bed in a real room instead of a folding shelter unit at the mouth of a cave, which she appreciated more than she had expected to. But things were different in ways that were hard to explain to people who had not been there. She was quieter than she used to be. Not sad, just quieter. Like something in her had settled during those 30 nights and had not unsettled itself since. Greg noticed. He did not say anything about it directly because Greg was not that kind of person, but he started making slightly better coffee and leaving it on her workstation in the mornings without being asked. She took that as his version of checking in and appreciated it accordingly. Word of what had happened had spread further than she expected. She had not told anyone. She had come back, filed a basic incident report about the broken transport and the medical intervention, kept deliberately plain and factual, and gone back to work. But the Varith patrol that had radioed in about the human in the Dragon Cave had filed their own report. Anne Vorn's formal declaration of Ethvarath had apparently been recorded in the clan's own communication channels, which connected to the broader Outer Rim network in ways she had not fully understood. So people knew. Other human medics started sending her messages. Careful, professional messages that asked careful professional questions about field technique and improvised treatment in non-human patients. She answered them all. Some of them had started calling the approach of extended patient presence in impossible conditions, staying when the practical thing was to leave, the Voss method, which she found embarrassing every single time she heard it and said so clearly to anyone who brought it up. Greg thought it was funny. He printed the words on a piece of paper and stuck it to the medical bay door. She took it down. He put it back up. This went on for 3 weeks. She thought about Ash. She did not talk about it much. It was not the kind of thing that translated easily into conversation, but she thought about it. She wondered how he was flying. Whether the healed wing gave him any trouble in cold weather. Whether Dara was still curious about everything, whether Vorn was still making that occasional almost laugh sound when something genuinely surprised him. She did not expect to see them again. She hoped they were well. She thought that was probably enough. She was wrong about the first part. It was an ordinary morning. The kind that gives no warning. Lena was in the medical bay running inventory when the outpost alarm system gave a single short tone. Not the emergency tone, the other one. The proximity alert. Something large entering the outpost perimeter. She heard voices outside. Then more voices. Then the particular quality of silence that happens when a large number of people all stop talking at the same time because they are all looking at the same thing. She put down her inventory pad and walked to the door. The outpost yard was not large. It was a flat open area between the main building and the supply depot, used mostly for transport vehicles and cargo deliveries. It was not designed for what was currently happening to it. 9 dragons were landing in it. Not all at once. They came down in a careful sequence, one after another, wings pulling back and legs meeting the ground with controlled, deliberate weight. The outpost personnel had scattered to the edges of the yard. Nobody was running. Nobody was reaching for anything. They were just standing very still at the perimeter with the expressions of people whose morning had just become something they were going to talk about for the rest of their lives. Lena stood in the medical bay doorway and looked at the dragon at the front of the group. He was not small anymore. He had never been large for a dragon. Even now, fully grown into whatever he would eventually become, he was not the size of Vorn. But he was not the collapsed creature she had found in the cave either. He was broad and strong, his legs planted firmly on the outpost ground, his wings folded against his sides with the easy confidence of something that had made peace with what it was. His scales were not the ash gray of the cave. They were not even the developing amber she had watched come in night by night over 30 days. They were deep, rich. The color of amber held up to strong light, warm and layered and completely alive. Ash looked across the yard and found her immediately. She did not know how. She was one person in a doorway among many people standing at the edges of a busy yard. But his eyes went straight to her and stayed there, the way they had on the first night in the cave when he had opened them and looked at this strange soft creature sitting beside him in the dark. Behind him, Dara, her gold eyes bright and moving over everything with that familiar open curiosity. And behind Dara, large and still and ancient against the morning sky, Vorn. And 6 others she did not recognize, clan members she understood. The clan that had come together on a flat outpost yard on an ordinary morning. Lena walked out. The yard was completely silent. No one spoke. She was aware of eyes on her, human eyes from the perimeter, dragon eyes from the yard, but she walked steadily across the open ground until she was standing in front of Ash. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. 6 months. She could see it in him, the health that had fully settled in, the strength that had built itself properly over time, the ease in the way he held his wings and his head. He was well. Completely and properly well. She reached up and placed her hand on his forehead. He went still under her touch. The same stillness as always, not the stillness of pain being endured, not the stillness of caution. The settled stillness of something that was exactly where it wanted to be. She kept her hand there and did not say anything because her throat was doing the thing it had done on the 3rd day of training when he had flown and not fallen and she had stood with her face turned up to the morning sky. She was not going to examine it too closely. She was just going to stand here with her hand on his forehead and let the moment be what it was. Then Vorn spoke. He was loud enough, deliberately, clearly, with the careful intention of someone who wanted their words recorded and remembered, that every person at the perimeter heard him. Every sensor in the outpost yard picked him up. Every communication device within range captured the words cleanly. "We have come," Vorn said, "to say to your people what we did not know to say at the beginning." The yard was so quiet that the wind through the outpost structures was audible. "We did not understand you," he continued. "You're kind. We looked at you and we saw something small and soft and without armor or wings or great physical strength, and we made a judgment from that looking." He paused. "We were wrong. Not about what you are physically. About what that means. We did not understand that physical smallness and genuine strength are not the same conversation." He looked at Lena. Then at the humans along the perimeter. Then back at Lena. "One of yours came to a cave in the Ashstone Ridges and found something our own clan had left behind. She had no reason to stay. No obligation. No gain. She stayed because the thing she found was still breathing, and where she comes from that has always been enough." His pale eyes were steady and clear. "You are not weak. You are something we have no word for." Nobody moved. Greg, standing at the edge of the yard with his coffee cup still in his hand, said nothing. His face was doing something complicated. Dara made a soft sound and moved forward until she was standing beside Ash, her gold eyes on Lena with that expression she had worn since the first day she edged down the ridge, open and wanting and completely without pretense. Lena reached out her other hand and placed it on Dara's head without looking away from Vorn. The Galactic Cooperative Assembly received the recorded transmission from the Veldara outpost that same afternoon. It caused considerable confusion across 17 member species and 4 non-member observer groups. Emergency sessions were called. Committees were formed. Papers were written and debated and rewritten. The central question, one that had been sitting quietly in the background of galactic records since humans first appeared on the Outer Rim, was brought formally to the floor. How do you classify humanity? The debate went on for a long time. Years, in fact. Various proposals were made and rejected. Various categories were suggested and argued over and eventually set aside. The problem, one senior assembly member noted in a recorded session, was that humans did not fit the existing frameworks. They were not the strongest, not the most technologically advanced, not the longest lived or the most numerous, but they kept showing up in places they had no practical reason to be. Staying in situations that offered them nothing. Carrying water in helmets at 2 in the morning. Sitting in caves with dying creatures that were not their species and not their problem and not their responsibility. A junior scholar from a small research station on the edge of the rim eventually submitted a paper that was 11 pages long and carefully argued and thoroughly referenced. The title was 4 words. The Ones Who Stay. The assembly voted on it in a session that lasted less than 10 minutes. It passed without a single objection. In the Ashstone Ridges, on a night with a clear sky and a strong eastern wind, a dragon with deep amber scales and a pale scar along his left wing rode the thermal currents above a cave that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and old ration bars. He flew without effort, without hesitation, without the tilting and the corrections and the 3 crashes that had come before the day he finally did not fall. He flew the way things fly when they have fully become what they were always supposed to be. Below him the ridges were dark and quiet and wide. Above him the stars were out. And somewhere back at a small human outpost at the edge of the Outer Rim, a field medic with a medic pack and 30 nights of cave floor behind her was drinking her morning coffee and watching the sky through the window the way people watch skies when they are thinking about something that made them glad. The galaxy turned. And the ones who stay, kept staying.